Now, UAW Strike news. There's a deal on the table, and I'm recently wrong, because I now thought that only because they're striking certain groups of people that they could strike for a much longer time, and I thought it meant that they likely would strike for a much longer time. But originally I said the strike couldn't last more than really 2 months because the UAW would run out of money and manufacturers would start actually to get pretty desperate at the 3-month mark. But that was with the idea of every single worker striking. Because if all production was down, 2 months, no production, the lots would essentially have been emptied. Because September, fantastic sales month. October has been incredible. I'm so busy. This is going to be the best October for sales I've had in all of my Octobers. And I mean by like twice as good as my average. And it's true for the general dealership. It's a fantastic month. So the UAW strike, originally I was saying, couldn't really last, shouldn't last, based on dollars and versus inventory. Dollars with these guys, inventory for the manufacturers. They needed to come to an agreement within 2 months. Now, what has it been? 41 days. And well, here's the big news, the deal. It has been ratified. It still has to be ratified by the members, so it could fall through, but it's, I'd say, highly unlikely at this point. It follows a 6-week strike by more than 14,000 workers at Stellantis. And at Stellantis, we'll talk about Ford and GM, but Stellantis assembly plants in Michigan and Ohio were on strike, as well as warehouses across the nation. That's parts warehouses. Just like GM, getting parts could be tough because GM's still in a bit of trouble here. So the deal with Stellantis, which is essentially, it's the deal with Ford as well, because Ford has ratified, well, not ratified, they're in the final, they need to ratify it, but they've got what you could say is sort of a verbal agreement on the table. Everyone seems in agreement. The members need to vote. But it looks like it's worked out at Ford as well. Now for the deal with Stellantis makes it so that vehicles under the Dodge, Ram, Chrysler, and Jeep brands, as of this past Saturday, so right after Ford, UAW President Shawn Fain and Vice President Rick Boyer, the union's chief negotiator in the talks, they have hailed this as a major victory, so they're happy. So if they're hailing it as a major victory, they're going to tell the members, you should really vote on this. It's more pay. We'll cover exactly how much. The tentative agreement includes the revival of an Illinois assembly plant. So this is fantastic for someone that likes to see a strong economy with, people having jobs. So you like safety, because people who are paid well, guess what, aren't desperate. They're not robbing people at gunpoint, because if people don't have any money, but the love of their life or their child needs costly medication to survive, you can't, bad things happen. And good people will do bad things in times of desperation. So I'm really happy to hear that this agreement comes with the revival of the Illinois assembly plant. It was closed in February, and it was originally going to put 1,200 people out of work. And originally, it looked like there would have been about another 5,000 U.S. jobs at Dodge also put out of work in the U.S. Now, day 44 of the strike, and we've got Ford and Dodge. It looks like things are worked out. Now, for GMC, the escalated walkout, things have escalated. So Dodge worked out a deal Saturday, essentially, just needs to be voted on, but Shawn Fain and the vice president of negotiations are saying this is a huge victory, so all the workers are going to be told, vote to ratify this. So it's pretty much done deal. But GMC, more people, more workers walked out because GMC is like, nope, we're not doing this. GMC is like, no, we're not giving in. They don't want to give the 25% salary increase. And do remember, this is to cover a period of time. It's not 25% all in 1 year. They're not suddenly getting a 25% increase. This isn't greed on the workers' part whatsoever. This is about workers having enough to get by and not have to be desperate or worried about how they're going to pay for medication or a kid's soccer, your child's soccer. And I can understand. When I grew up, it was, I could have played soccer, but it was like, yeah, I'm not going to, if I start playing sports, I'm not going to be putting necessarily my parents in the best situation. So it's good when people have enough spending money so that their kids can grow up well. Now, for GM, the Spring Hill, Tennessee plant, there's a walkout. And it's GM's largest in North America. And this was just hours after the Stellantis deal was reached. And prior, just a day or two earlier, the Ford deal was reached. It's nearly 4,000 workers, and they're joining about the 18,000 already striking GM workers from the factories in Texas, Michigan, Missouri, and Tennessee. Now, the added pressure on GM is substantial as Spring Hill makes engines for other plants in addition to big ticket vehicles such as the Cadillac Lyriq, the Cadillac Crossover SUVs, and the GMC Acadia. So this one plant has an effect on many models. I'm kind of hoping that GM says, yes, 25% for X salary increase for X number of years. Hey, you know what? We're going to make sure that we catch you up to inflation and that we keep up with inflation and that your life is a little better because, you know what? These workers gave a huge sacrifice in 2008, 2009 to make sure that GM and Dodge didn't go bankrupt. So the pact includes a 25% in general wage increases over the next 4.5 years. Now, that means a top assembly plant. There'll be some headlines saying like, oh, they're making $42 an hour. And as if like that's, a bad thing. But that's for a top assembly plant worker, $42 per hour. So with 11%, there'll be 11% coming immediately. So an 11% pay increase soon as the deal is ratified. Now that's good because interest in the last 2 years, in the last 3 years since 2019, interest has gone up as well, but inflation has gone up by, basically 20% since 2019. So in about 3.5 years. So the immediate 11% is to just help bring those salaries back to what essentially they used to be because inflation increases the cost of living. It increases the price of everything. So when governments print out money and give out money like they won the lottery, we should be worried because that's all of our money. And what's incredible is if you go back to 1913 and prior to 1913, when governments wanted to spend money that they did not have, meaning go into debt, they had to essentially have a referendum. They essentially had to ask every U.S. citizen. This is the right way to do government, folks. How did they do this? How did they achieve this? Well, let's say you wanted to go to war. You had to have war bonds. And if no one bought the war bonds or very few people bought the war bonds, you didn't have the money to go to war. If you wanted to have basic income for everyone, and it means you're going to magically print off and invent $100 billion. Ha! You should love me. I'm giving you free income, folks. No, you're giving us more taxes. We're going to lose some of our freedoms. The cost of everything will go up. You'll give something to everyone at the cost of everyone having to pay more for everything. Somehow, and it's not because politicians are stupid that they don't realize this. They do realize this. It's because they're very smart people. So there must be an added agenda. There's no way that they're too stupid to realize that when you print off money that you do not have, that you cause inflation. We need to get back to the point where if governments want to spend money that's outside of their budget, the money, tax dollars, that they need to create bonds, that they have to go out to the public and say, do you like this cause? Would you put your money into this bond for this cause, whether it's going to war, whether it's basic income, whether it's universal health care, whatever their political agenda is based on their ideology that may or may not completely blind them to facts and data. They need to get public opinion through bonds. That's what needs to happen, just like it did from prior 1913 and prior. Throughout American history, if you want to spend money you didn't have as a government, you had to get the people's approval. And back then, governments were small and maybe more effective because they weren't a big old not they're not that they're individually overpaid, but there's just so many of them. The bureaucracy is so huge. And that was a way to have control. You didn't have in 1913, you didn't have a secret, unexplained fund going to, well, those are black projects. Do you get to know about them? No, they're black projects. What do you do in black projects? Who knows? Maybe it's, causing havoc in other countries. Maybe it's alien technology. Who knows? It's black projects. We just know that if you have to hide it, it's probably not a good thing. So let's cover more on the UAW workers. Now, that's my rant for the evening. I won't have another one. Workers will also get a cost of living pay that would bring the raises to a compounded 33%, with top assembly plant workers making more than $42 per hour. At Stellantis, top scale workers now make around $31 per hour. Fain said Stellantis had proposed cutting 5,000 US jobs, but now they're going to be creating, this new contract is going to, create about 5,000 US jobs. Wow. So that's fantastic. That means a better economy, more money for everyone. And Ford was the first. And it's cool. I said this, not prior to the strike, but early on in the strike, I did say that I felt that Ford would be the first to reach a deal. And that was based on, a bit of psychology analysis, I guess. I saw that the CEO of Ford, Jim Farley, I think he's a great, in real life, I think he's a good person. I think he's a great guy. And you could tell it from his words when he was saying hey, his grandparents worked at Ford. His family worked at Ford and, not head of Ford. They worked at Ford as workers. And he basically made it pretty clear. He wants there to be a fair deal. He wants workers to have good, fair conditions, that he wants them to have as much as what's possible. But the last many weeks have been all about going from 20% to 25%, because early on Ford was like, we'll give you 20%. And they were pretty quick with getting that out. That was about week 2. It came out. Ford was like, we will give you 20%. Well, 5% more. There's the cost of living that's been adjusted. So yes, this is a huge victory, and it's not just a huge victory for the UAWs. And congratulations to all those on the strike. Congratulations for those working on the negotiations. You did a fantastic job. And what's amazing, this is good for all Americans, because there's going to be 5,000. There's going to be jobs that stay in America, and there'll be added jobs to America. This is great. Better. We can't see manufacturing. We can't have all these harsh environmental laws closing down manufacturing and business here, so that these corporations can, just essentially be forced to go pollute pretty much as they want in India or China. Or, if they start to get harsher laws, well, they'll find other countries. So we don't want all our jobs that, back in the 60s put families, kids through college, that have provided families to have a house, 2 vehicles, and a cottage based on one salary. My grandfather, my stepfather's side, my grandfather was a factory worker, and he was a supervisor. And being a supervisor in a factory, he had a 3-story in Montreal, and it was considered, the poor area back then. But anyways, he had a 3-story in Montreal. He had a car, and he had a cottage, and he was the only one that worked.
That's not how it is today.
No, because there is an agenda that pushed, really, really pushed for both sexes to be working. And we thought we'd get a good deal out of it because there'd be more money in the household, but we have less money in the household. Even with 2, if you look at averages back from the 1930s, the height of the Depression, and you look at what one individual was making, well, now that individual, to be equivalent, would be making $90-some thousand. But the average salary in the US isn't $90-some thousand. It's about half of that. So it really literally takes 2 people working at the average salary to buy or have as much purchasing power as they did in 1930 at the height of the Depression. And that's giving me heat. I keep saying heat because I'm getting red in the face. It's frustrating because there was a lot of money, lobbying money, pushed on politicians to make sure that every household had to have both people working. And it was all sold on the idea of, freedom and liberty, but the result has been less freedom and less liberty.
We have a great question to finish.
Thank you.
Arcubo said, how long before Ford start up the assembly line and put out vehicles?
Yes, that is the great news. So probably by next week,
Woohoo!
we should see the Ford Ranger, Ford Bronco factory up and running. And boy, thank you everyone who's getting back to work. We are looking forward. The Maverick was never really touched, but we are looking forward to getting our Broncos. We've ordered a Ford Ranger Raptor, haven't we?
Yeah.
Are you looking forward to it, or is it just me? Honestly.
Maybe it's more you. I love the look, but like I always said, we have too much cars. It's always that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I'll trade in the Lightning for it. I love the sound of the Ford Ranger Raptor, and even instead of the Lightning, I think I'd like this Badlands Bronco, which the factory, the UAW workers back to work this week, or at worst, in the worst case scenario, early to mid next week, but probably sometime this week, Ford is going to be back to building our Ford Broncos and our Ford Rangers 2024 models.